Good afternoon and welcome everyone. It's great to see such a diverse group of people from different organizations and roles in the international community here today. That's not accidental. We actually wanted to bring together all these different groups because they all have a role to play in this important challenge of ending child marriage. Today's session builds on the momentum from a big event that we had in New York and launched a report, which I hope many of you have seen. I think there's little leaflets on your chairs about it, about the economic costs of child marriage. So obviously, child marriage is a moral issue and a social issue. But it's very much also an economic issue because marriage is the largest economic decision that most people will make in their lives. And so it's very important to have, to think about it through an economic lens. For many people there around the world, large sums of money actually get transferred in marriage, either in dowry or in bride price, going the other way. And in my own research, we've shown that if you don't fully take into account the economic complexities of the marriage market, you can end up with, actually having a backlash and having a negative effect on child marriage, even when you go in with the right intentions. On the other hand, understanding the economic issues in the marriage market can really help you solve the problem. So, we worked with Save the Children in Bangladesh and providing a small incentive to parents of adolescent girls who were still unmarried led to a 25% drop in child marriage, and I see Diva in the audience who helped run that program. New analysis by the CGD team, who you're going to hear from later, has been looking at the economic costs of failing to take action. So they looked across 27 countries and found that the cost of inaction was $175 billion a year in lost future earnings from failures to stay in school and get the economic returns to that, and poor health outcomes and other consequences. These really have big economic impacts. And yet, if you look at the funding that goes into programs to end child marriage, it's tiny. So only 0.025% of recent ODA has gone into efforts to reduce child marriage. And obviously we know that ODA is shrinking, and so it's getting harder and harder to find that support. So I think we have to all ask ourselves, what is the role that each of us can play? And what does smart investment look like in this sector? So let me end with 3 quick points. Progress on child marriage cannot be driven entirely from the outside. It is a very political issue, and it requires governments in countries to take actions and be in the lead. But there is a lot of support that they can get in doing that. And today you'll hear from people who are working on this on the ground and dealing with those challenges. Second, we can't approach this issue by only thinking about girls and women. We have to think about the role of men and boys in this. As I say, when you're thinking about a marriage, it's an economic partnership for many years. It's like a merger. in economic terms, and there's two parts of that. And so, you have to think about both sides of the equation here. Men and boys have to be part of the solution. And third, we have to be really clear about what we do know and what we don't know, because this is a complicated area that involves economics and social norms, and things are evolving very fast. So we're going to dig into what the evidence says now, but it is a topic where we have to be honest about the gaps that remain. So thank you all for being here and your commitment to working on this difficult issue. And with that, I want to turn to Kehinde Ajay to help frame the conversation. Kehinde runs our gender program here at CGD.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that welcome and introduction. And thank you all for being with us today to take some time to discuss what we know about this issue and how we can move things forward in terms of increased investments and interventions to end child marriage. I'm going to start by sharing some framing remarks and then pass it over to Rachel Parodi to share some additional remarks before we go into a panel discussion, bringing in different perspectives on what we know about concrete actions that we can take to address this issue and increase investments to end child marriage. So I will start by presenting some work to just give us an economic view on investment to end child marriage. As Rachel said, this is often seen and is well recognized as an issue of human rights, but often less recognized is the economic significance of child marriage and what the implications are. So this is joint work with Gabriela Smarelli and Radhika Nagesh, who are colleagues here at CGD, and it was presented and integrated as part of a report that was released last month by the Institute of Global Politics Women's Initiative at Columbia University, which is co-led by Rachel Vogelstein, who's here with us today, and Jen Klein. So you'll hear more about that today. So as many of you in here know, collectively, as a community, we agreed to the goal of ending child marriage by 2030 as one of the Sustainable Development Goals. There has been some progress towards that over the last 25 years, but still 1 in 5 young women are married before age 18. So that means that there are almost 650 million girls and women alive today who were child brides. That's a huge number of people. And when we think about what does that mean for their lives, those individuals, for their communities, for their economies, for the society, for the world as a whole, one way to think about this is what is the economic cost of child marriage. And so in our analysis, we look at what the economic cost of child marriage is. And part of this is accelerating efforts to address it, because at the rate we're going, we're very far from achieving the goal of ending child marriage by 2030. So what are the economic implications of this? What does child marriage imply for young people who are getting married? And we focus on this report on and what are 4 core components of it, and estimate that the total cost of $175 billion per year for a set of 27 countries that comprise 70% of the global burden. So this is not even thinking about the whole globe or all of that dimensions of people's lives that are impacted. But if we look at impacts of health-related costs, which are child mortality, increases in maternal mortality, experience of intimate partner violence, miscarriage, stillbirth, we estimate that these costs amount to up to $130 billion per year. Because girls who get married are more likely to have children who die in infancy. They're themselves more likely to die when they're pregnant and to experience these additional health impacts. The second core component where we see impacts is on earnings. And as Rachel mentioned, one of the big implications of child marriage is that girls drop out of school. And this lower educational attainment has implications for labor force participation. Girls are less likely to participate in the labor market when they grow up, and they earn less. And we estimate that these costs amount to $45 billion per year in lost earnings because of the prevalence of child marriage. So this is using DHS, so Demographic and Health Surveys data for what we know of the current prevalence of child marriage and what the current implications or associations of child marriage are on these outcomes. But we also know that we're in a world where we're seeing a lot of negative trends. So there's increases in impacts of climate change, which puts households into increasing situations of vulnerability, which is a key driver of child marriage, the economic considerations associated with that. Also, conflict and funding cuts could raise costs. So we know that there are these huge costs from child marriage. A second issue that we look at in this analysis is what is the current status of funding to address child marriage. So Girls Not Brides, Girl First Fund, and Publish What You Fund partnered to do this analysis of recent funding levels across the international community. And what they find is that trends in primary funding, so that's funding for projects which have been designed to address child marriage as a core priority, has been declining from a peak in 2019 to a low level of about $50 million a year current in the last recent year, 2023, for which we have data. Secondary funding, this is funding for projects addressing child marriage of one of several objectives. So we don't know exactly how much of this funding is going to child marriage. That has been increasing over time to almost 5 times an increase, which means implies an increasing integration of child marriage into broader funding projects. However, we know that there is a big risk of further funding decreases. So if we look at what this shows is projected funding declines from donor announcements for countries that were among the top 10 donors of funders of projects to end child marriage in green, compared to the remaining funders, the top funders from OECD DAC donors who were not primary funders of child marriage. We see the green line indicates that there's a larger decline in funding among funders that historically supported initiatives to end child marriage. So even in the global shrinking of funding, this suggests that the funding cuts are going to be even more extreme for funders who traditionally fund child marriage. And we see a lot of funders who are shifting away from gender equality as a foreign policy priority, which means that cuts for gender equality may even be larger than the cuts for other areas. And then beyond bilateral funding, a lot of prominent philanthropic funding has also wound down. So we see what the current funding situation is. We know what the economic costs of inaction are. The last thing we look at in the report is what is the required funding to address child marriage. To estimate this, we look at what is the projected number of girls who will be at risk of experiencing child marriage, given the current prevalence rates and the current projected number of population estimates of adolescent girls across the globe. And we estimate that it would take as a minimum scenario of what the cost of delivering an effective child marriage intervention based on existing evidence, is that it will take a minimum of $1.3 billion a year over 5 years to lower rates from 1 in 5 to 1 in 7. If we go and estimate the goal of eliminating child marriage altogether, that would be $4.3 billion per year over 5 years. And we recognize that in the current context, it may be necessary to take strategic steps towards the ultimate goal of ending child marriage by committing around or mobilizing around an intermediate objective, like reducing from 1 in 5 to 1 in 7. Even beyond these global estimates that we calculate, there's a lot of growing localized assessments from groups like the Accelerate Hub at Oxford that look at specific country contexts, like in Kenya or in Ethiopia, and confirm the similar impacts that takeaways that we find, that the estimated return on investment is high, so on the order of 4 to 1 or 20 to 1, depending on the context and the intervention. What we know is that beyond this international funding, it will be required to increase domestic mobilization of funding to address this issue. So the key takeaways we have from our analysis is that the economic cost of inaction greatly exceeds the minimum funding levels required to address child marriage. We see a global funding at risk of decline, while the cost of inaction, given all of the concerning trends we see globally, the cost of inaction are likely or at risk of, or could well rise. But there are a lot of opportunities on the positive side. There are a lot of opportunities to increase funding using child marriage as an entry point for impact on other sectors like poverty reduction, education, sexual reproductive health, or crisis response. And ultimately, these returns on investment include broader benefits, not just for girls at risk, but for other girls in their communities, for boys in their communities, and if we think about the economic implications for economies and societies as a whole. So I'll turn it over to Rachel to tell us more about what we know about concrete ways to address child marriage, and we'll share these additional resources, the analysis I mentioned, the report I mentioned, and the Girls Not Brides and Girls First Fund analysis for you to delve in deeper. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kehinde, and thank you all for joining. My name is Rachel Pirati. I work in the Africa Gender Innovation Lab at the World Bank, and soon my slides will be showing. Kehinde has just made, I think, a really strong case for investing in efforts to reduce child marriage. And I'd like to build on that and maybe bring a little bit more positive energy and make three main points. So first, it is achievable. Ending child marriage is an achievable goal. Second, and related, thanks to the work of many people, we do know what works to reduce child marriage. Rachel said earlier that there are gaps in our knowledge. That's absolutely true, but we do have a strong evidence base to inform investments to end child marriage. And last, and also related, in addition to knowing what works, we do have some evidence on what does not work, or what types of approaches might be insufficient or insufficiently cost-effective to work at scale. And we need to use all of that information to ensure that our investments are locally adapted and evidence-informed. So I'm not going to attempt a full literature review in 7 minutes. I'm just going to give some highlights and maybe some key takeaways. And the first is education. There is very consistent evidence that expanding access to education reduces child marriage. I would like to highlight an intervention in Niger that provided 3 years of scholarships and tutoring to girls attending middle school. These were for girls who lived in rural villages that did not have a school in the village. And so the scholarships helped to cover the cost of living with a host family closer to school. And at the end of this 3-year period, girls in those treatment communities were half as likely to be married as those who didn't have this program. And the intervention also changed parents' preferences. It led them to be more likely to prefer that their daughters continue further in their education and delay marriage. And that's just one example. There are many more studies that show that increasing access to education can reduce child marriage. This includes other studies of scholarship programs. It also includes studies of other types of government reforms and investments, including expanding the number of years of compulsory education, eliminating school fees, constructing more schools, and this is not an exhaustive list. Right? Overall, what we see is that alleviating financial and logistical barriers to schooling increases educational attainment and delays marriage. That's the first one. Second, I'd like to talk about age of marriage laws. Age of marriage laws are important, but they're insufficient for eliminating child marriage, and they do come with some risks. So we see that on average, laws that set the minimum legal age of marriage at 18 with no exceptions can lead to an increase in the age of marriage. That's on average. And those laws seem to have especially strong effects for marriage at the youngest ages, which is really important. But there are caveats. First, national laws on age of marriage tend to have a stronger impact on marriage age in urban areas than they do in rural areas. And this is because formal legal systems generally have a stronger influence on social life in urban areas than in rural areas. So legal reforms alone may not reach the places where child marriage rates are highest. Second, and from a very different context, there's research from Mexico that found that enforcing age of marriage laws did decrease rates of marriage for people under the age of 18, but it also led to an increase in informal unions. And that's not necessarily desirable because young women who are in informal unions do not have the same legal rights as they would if they were formally married. So this is a concern in places where there are relatively high rates of informal unions. Last, from again another context, and this is from contexts where families exert relatively tight control over the marriage process. In those contexts, there are risks that laws about age of marriage can be used by families to undermine the agency of adolescents in marriage decisions. And furthermore, when age of marriage laws are accompanied by legal restrictions on consent for sexual activity, those laws can also impose barriers for adolescents trying to access sexual and reproductive health services. So overall, age of marriage laws are probably a part of the solution, but they're not going to be sufficient on their own, and enforcement needs to be really carefully monitored. The last very large bucket of interventions that I like to discuss are multi-component and norm-shifting interventions. These have had only mixed success. And I think in part this is because the interventions that have been tested are not always well tailored to the local context. And we know that the drivers of child marriage vary dramatically across contexts. There's variation in preferences regarding age of marriage, in the role of caregivers versus adolescents, in the marriage process. There's variation in levels of premarital sexual activity and premarital pregnancy. All of these things matter for the drivers of child marriage. So on this slide, oh, it's not here, this is the old version. On the new version of the slides, which we will circulate afterward, there's a picture of a report that was written by Kehinde and my colleague Estelle Kusube, which is on adolescent girls in sub-Saharan Africa. And what's really nice about the report is it identifies different pathways of transitions into adulthood that are common in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's vast variation. And that's the kind of information that's crucial for designing interventions to reduce child marriage. I'd like to highlight also another study that is a helpful illustration of this variation in drivers. It was a comparative study that examined the effectiveness of a multi-component girls' empowerment intervention in India, Niger, Malawi, and Mali. And the intervention was successful in reducing child marriage in India, but not in the other contexts. And the researchers think that this was because the design was not specifically tailored to address the drivers of child marriage in those contexts. So specifically in Niger, they found that many girls themselves prefer early marriage because it comes with social status and it's a desirable pathway into adulthood. And the intervention did not sufficiently enhance alternative pathways. It didn't enhance access to education or economic opportunities, so it had no impact on rates of early marriage. In Malawi, which is a very different context, premarital pregnancy is an important driver of early marriage. And there, the intervention did not change rates of pregnancy, and so it had no impact on child marriage. So the lesson overall is that it's really, really important, and Rachel already said this in the opening, it's really important that the interventions to prevent child marriage address the locally relevant drivers. And I want to end on a positive note and highlight that while many multi-component empowerment interventions have not succeeded, there are some examples of comprehensive programs that have had success. And I'd like to highlight a recent one from northern Nigeria that was one of these programs that was really grounded in local realities. And it had huge impacts on rates of child marriage. And this is in a place where rates of child marriage are relatively high. So just to come back to the three main points, this is an achievable goal. We do have information to inform how to make really strong investments to end child marriage. Thank you.
While everyone's getting situated, I'll introduce myself. My name is Rachel Vogelstein. I lead the Women's Initiative at Columbia University's Institute of Global Politics. I want to start by thanking Rachel Glenister and Kehinde Ajayi again for hosting this important discussion here at CGD and for their partnership on our recent report estimating the cost of inaction on child marriage. So we've heard a bit about the substantial cost of inaction on this issue. Now we're going to talk about what we need to prioritize to address this practice, what investments the countries need to make in order to reap some of the projected returns that are in the Columbia report you heard about earlier. We are really privileged to have a stellar panel of experts with us to help answer these questions and build on the terrific presentation we just heard from Rachel Pirati of the Gender Innovation Lab. First, we are really honored to be joined by Dr. Kekenya Nataya, who is a world-renowned educator and advocate for girls' health and human rights and the founder of Kekenya's Dream, a nonprofit that provides holistic education, health, and skills development to girls in Kenya. Second, we are thrilled to have Dr. Anju Malhotra, a distinguished professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Public Health, who is currently serving as a senior advisor at the Global Financing Facility at the World Bank. She is a recognized expert on gender equality, reproductive health, and adolescent girls' rights, and has been a leading force in shaping the SDG target and movement to end child marriage. Third, we are grateful to welcome Mr. Mustafa Akali, who serves as the Deputy Director of the International Development Association at the Nigerian Ministry of Finance. Thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule this week at the spring meetings to join us. And last but certainly not least, we are pleased to have Laxman Belbase, who is the Global Co-Director of the Men Engaged Alliance and a leading voice in the field of men, masculinities, and gender justice, as well as a faculty member at the Elliott School of International Affairs at George Washington University. Thanks to all of you for being here. Kekenya, I'd like to start with you. Your organization takes a really holistic approach to preventing child marriage in rural Kenya by addressing many of the barriers that we've heard about that girls face, from lack of education and healthcare to harmful social norms, limited economic opportunity, and the like. Your organization was born out of a deeply personal experience. You were engaged at the age of 5 and negotiated with your father to attend school rather than marry, and later went on to earn your PhD and found your organization. So can you talk to us about the consequences for girls, for families, for communities when child marriage takes place, and why it's so urgent that we increase efforts to end it?
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Center for Global Development, to giving us this opportunity to be able to share the work that we are doing, especially for me on the ground. So, you know, when I was little, I dreamed of becoming a teacher. Because I saw my teachers in school, and that was like my really thing. But I ended up doing, I guess I'm still a teacher, but just working with girls, because I grew up in a community and that girls married off as soon as they reach puberty. You know, I escaped child marriage. I survived female genital cutting. But I was able to get my education, and that really made a big difference in my own life. That was many years ago, but it's unfortunate that that still exists.
The community where I live, about 50% of girls are married before they're 19 years old. What that means is that once the girl, and FGM and child marriage are kind of interconnected in most of the communities that practice FGM. Once a girl goes through FGM, she is ready for marriage. And that is because, one, the family, the big thing about the family, they're looking at, if you have many kids, you're not be able to feed them, the girl is the one you give her away so that they can get the bride price or the dowry, the cows are given to the family so that they're able to educate the boys and are able to survive on. But the thing that we normally forget is that what happens to that girl? When a girl is married, first of all, she's not willing to do it. She's just being forced to go through this marriage. For the girls that I've met, it's not that they're happily going there because they have seen that once you get married, you become totally like a property to someone. You right away, you get pregnant. Right away, you start having children. We have seen, of course, the research talks about, there's a lot of health risk for young girls who are having children. There's maternal health deaths and child deaths, and that is a real thing. Like, it's not a statistics. I think the way we were sharing, it's real people, it's real girls. We talked about, of course, our education stops. That's the very first thing that stops. And it just goes into this, circle of poverty from one generation to another. We know that if a girl is married when she hasn't finished even high school, that means even her daughters are not going to continue with school. Her daughters are going to continue the same journey that we see. We've made progress. We did make progress, but COVID came. And now there's a lot of wars and a lot of this climate change that is so prevalent. When we talk about climate change, I think it's droughts. What that means is there's no food in their homes. It means that the girl has to walk long distance to go get the water. It means that she's missing school to be able to do those activities. If she's married, it means that she's actually carrying a baby on the back and bringing water from the river. It's just a whole other issue when you talk about climate change and how that is really impacting the girls. And so, and just the shrinking of AIDS, that is a reality. What is missing? It's so urgent because when you shut programs that were supporting girls, those safe spaces that existed for girls, they were closed. They were closed when USAID stopped funding, when the US government decided to pull out the funding for that. The education, scholarships, you talked about scholarships and how those are very important. We are going back. And the more, and we've not even talked about the gender-based violence, the girls. We see, we do a holistic programming because I don't think there's one thing that you say, put the girl in school. Yes, put the girl in school, but is that school where she's going, does it even have a bathroom or a toilet that she can be feeling safe? Does she have sanitary pads? Are the teachers in that school gender responsive, or they're also carrying the same norm that the girl should be married and they don't pay attention to her? So there's a lot of issues that are all interconnected. The girl is probably coming from a family that is very abusive to her mother, so she's seeing violence at home. She's not going to concentrate in a classroom. So it's really important to look at the holistic programming for girls. If you're going to give a scholarship, you need to also know that the school where she's going is actually safe and it's protective. The road that she's walking to school, we teach girls on self-defense because sometimes sometimes you just need to defend yourself. So there's a lot that is going on, and when we pull funding, we don't reach these girls. We close the hospitals, the clinics, we close. There's no access to education because there's no money, there's no food in the school. The list goes on. And I think that is the reality that we don't, when we live in a place where you can just go and buy food and, when there's no food, the family says, okay, the closest thing, let me marry her off so that we can at least survive. And so there's a lot that is going on. We do need to, feel like pulling people back and saying, the progress we have made, we cannot let it go back. We cannot. It's failing our communities, it's failing our girls. And we just need to invest more. I wish governments, I wish people could just realize that if you invest in women and girls, so many problems in this world will be ending.
Kekenya, you talked a little bit about, let's pause for applause. You talked a little bit about the regression that you're seeing after years of progress. And Anju, I'd like to pull you in to talk about that. You were deeply involved in the effort to set an SDG target to end child marriage by 2030. We're only 4 years away from reaching that deadline. Can you talk to us about how far we are from meeting that target and what you think countries need to prioritize to accelerate progress towards that target? And given the research that we heard about from CGD on the cost of inaction, can you say more about the economic implications here?
Sure. Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to have the child marriage topic be part of the bank's spring meetings discussion. I've been working on it for the last 2 to 3 decades, so it's really exciting for me to see that it's still on the international development agenda. So a few thoughts, both building on what Kekenya said and also Rachel and your study. First of all, I think that when we set the target, when we were advocating for the target to be on the SDG, I think that was a big accomplishment. But I would have preferred to have set a realistic target within 15 years. But all the advocates really wanted to just say elimination. Child marriage can't be eliminated in less than 2 to 3 generations. And it requires a critical mass. So in the places where we see declines in child marriage happening, you first get to about 25%, and then it starts to accelerate. And it has a lot to do with, obviously, investments in girls' human capital rather than in their reproductive capital. So child marriage is a manifestation of a society basically investing in a girl's reproductive capital. And what we need to be doing is invest in their human capital, which means in their education, in their health, and increasingly job opportunities. So when the MDGs were happening, we were just interested in getting girls into school. But we are no longer at the point where just getting girls into school is enough. I mean, for the most part, in elementary schools now we have pretty much equal girls to boys ratios. But what countries need to realize, and these investments have to come not just from international development, from ODA. I mean, from the bank side, if we give IDA loans, they're really the country's money because the country's borrowing it. Now, where they put that money is what matters. And Kekenya's point that, you know, investing in women and girls is a really great return to investment. And we're looking at so much of Africa where there's a youth bulge. We're not going to get the demographic dividend from that youth bulge if half the population of that youth, the girls, don't have human capital investment. And that's what your study is showing. It's really opportunity cost, not just cost, but opportunity cost, right? So we do need to link, you know, I see 4 sectors as the spaces in our study. Shada and I did an evidence review of 30 studies, and Rachel very effectively noted that, you know, girls' education is the single best investment, but increasingly that investment has to be for girls to transition into jobs and paid employment. So we see, for example, in India, the decline in child marriage could be much faster if women's employment rates were higher, but they're not. That investment is not translating into jobs. Even women's employment schemes tend to favor more, you know, self-employment. We tend to have programs to get them to do small and medium-sized enterprises. But actually employment, you look at Bangladesh, for the longest time stuck at a very high level, but the garment industry made a huge difference in Bangladesh in girls' the child marriage rate starting to drop from close to 70% to now under 50%. So that those investments are important. Social protection investments are important. Many countries are already committed to social protection investments. So cash transfers for school, but also protection of pregnant girls, supporting them, those are important. So I see health sector, education sector, employment sector, and social protection sector as a key areas where we need to be making the case for both ODA and domestic spending to really systematically prioritize human capital investments in girls.
You noted that the SDG target was aspirational. We are not in danger of meeting it in this next 4-year period at the current rate of progress. But one of the things we tried to do in the Columbia report in partnership with CGD was think about what is an achievable target that we can reach over the next 5 years. So looking at the history of progress, going from 1 in 4 girls married under the age of 18 25 years ago to 1 in 5 today, together with CGD, we costed out that investment of $1.3 billion annually over the next 5 years could get us from 1 in 5 to 1 in 7.
Which is a reasonable target to go for, yeah.
And one we hope to discuss with the group assembled here today. I mean, coming together to figure out what we can reasonably achieve will be.
And we know that there's acceleration. So if you think about it, a lot of East Asian societies had very high rates of child marriage only 100 years ago, 75 years ago, and it's pretty much gone in those societies. I mean, look at Victorian society had high rates of child marriage. How many of those 50-year-old men married to 16-year-old girls have you seen in period pieces, right? It wasn't that uncommon. It was okay. People didn't think it was unacceptable, right? But it's the education revolution and women having jobs revolution and countries aspiring to have productivity that changes that dynamic. And what I'm seeing is that in countries where it is Nepal, India, Bangladesh, where it is changing, Ethiopia, what's happening is that when you have 20% of your girls going to high school, it's still not a common norm. But when you have 40% of your girls going to high school, then all of a sudden it starts to become a norm. And we do all these, small-scale norm, community-based norm interventions, but we don't realize what a big norm changer girls riding on bikes to school is, girls being seen in the public in school uniforms rather than carrying babies is, right? What role models women working as doctors, lawyers, teachers present for girls and for families. They want girls to earn money if that is a real possibility for the girls. But if you're going to send your daughter to school and she has no job opportunities, then it's much less attractive. So when you start hitting that critical mass between 30 and 40%, it accelerates. So hopefully if we set target 1 in 7 for now, in 10 years we can set a more ambitious target.
Mustafa, I want to bring you in. Nigeria has made some really important strides to expand girls' education and empowerment through initiatives like the Adolescent Girls Initiative for Learning and Empowerment Project, the Agile Project. From your perspective at the Ministry of Finance, how does your government prioritize and sustain investments in efforts to reduce child marriage, and what lessons have emerged from the work that you funded?
Thank you very much for having me, and I would like to start by thanking the Center for Global Development. For my own perspective of how we can deepen the efforts of the government in trying to reduce the early child marriage is by deepening some of the investments government of the Federal Republic of Nigeria has been putting in, just like you made mention of the Adolescent Girl Child Initiative for Learning. Prior to that investment, you find girls not going to school because of as little as wash area But with that investment, I think some of them have begun to see that government is there for them, putting in a lot of investments. And some of these interventions, because we operate a federalism, and it's not just the federal, we have some nationals. And in order to deepen that intervention, the federal, which is like the mother, has taken the initiative of giving it out to the subnationals as grants. There are so many interventions, such as the National Social Safety Net, which also provides some stipends, because some families disallow their children from going into higher education, maybe going beyond primary school and getting them married because of poverty index in such families. But with this intervention of giving them some incentives and not making keeping their girls at home to go for hawking, and when it is just some years into getting to adolescent age, they get them married at a younger age. I think that has dropped significantly, because there are heavy investments the federal government is putting on some of these initiatives that government has put in place. And I think that has dropped significantly, because people now don't see reasons why they should just get a girl into marriage at an early age, because they have seen from lessons drawn of issues around nutritional challenges, the stunting issue, and so many other social ills that come out of that early marriage. And I think it is reducing significantly. And another thing is with the level of advocacy, using the traditional and religious institutions, I think some of them who have this perspective around the religion, because the high rate of early child marriage is mostly from my own side of the northern Nigeria, and some of them is because of want of Islamic knowledge. They tend to perceive it that it is just embedded there in the scriptures that you must get your daughter married at that early stage. And it's because of want of knowledge. And now, because of advocacy and through the religious and traditional institutions, that has reduced significantly. And I think the government has invested a lot in so many programs and projects. The Hope PHC and the likes of them, my sister here will attribute to what I'm saying, that with those interventions, we have really, really worked hard to reduce the rate. And I'm sure if you go deep dive into the statistics, you'll agree with me that it is gradually reducing by the day.
Really demonstrating the importance of government investment, but also in programs to shift social norms. And that really, I think, naturally segues, Laxman, to the work that you're leading. And often missing from conversations about ending child marriage is the critical role of men and boys. So your organization, the Men Engage Alliance, is focused on bringing men and boys into these efforts to promote gender equality. So what are the key principles that you've learned from the work that you're doing, and why is partnering with men and boys so critical to addressing child marriage?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, those of you who don't know what Men Engage is, very quickly, we are a global network of civil society organizations that are primarily self-identified women's rights, feminist, LGBTIQ rights, youth-led organizations that come together to inquire about and learn and be effective on bringing boys and men into the part of the solution for advancing gender justice. So what we generally, I can tell you a story of how I started thinking about this and the critical role boys and men would have, including myself, back when. So I was with Save the Children, obviously, and then we worked with Girls, right? So it was a girls empowerment program on ending child marriage, challenging harmful social norms and I'm from Nepal. in the western part of Nepal. So when we used to work with the Gauls, at certain point in time, Gauls started raising very interesting questions. And some of them were, okay, we are now aware of what our rights are. We know what we need to be doing, what the consequences of child marriage. But I think given the patriarchy that we are in at home or in school or in public spaces and policy making, our voices are never heard. What if you go and talk with those boys and ask them to also mobilize and go back to home and say, argue with their fathers and mothers to say they don't want to go into child marriage? And they sort of push back on the whole idea of getting early marriage themselves as potential brides, or sorry, the grooms, is it called grooms? Yeah. Or some of them are already married, or as brothers of the sisters at home, right? So if they go and say and talk with parents to say, you can't, I don't want my sisters to be getting married, they are listened more, still as part of the patriarchal system. And then also at the time when, we know that gender is relational, it is structural, and we live in a world where boys and men do play a lot of, do have a lot of power. So how do we then mobilize boys and men to become agents of change? And that's when we started focusing on then how do we really meaningfully, and as we call it, as accountably, involved in advancing this work and to be the solution makers rather than being on the side of problems. And I think what we have realized after that is when we were then starting talking with boys, apparently there was same level of inquisitiveness also among boys and men about child marriage, because it is ultimately keeping them a lot of under pressure because of patriarch and because of the social norms and expectations that they need to be the breadwinners of the family, they need to be the protectors of the family, and all of that also compelled these boys to also go as seasonal workers in India, which then also then resulted into discontinuation of the education, then that increased violence at home. So it was kind of looked at different aspects, of the pieces of the puzzle, and I'm not a very good supporter of this economic arguments, and I used to until very recently. So I'm more of the human rights approach to this, and it is about human rights of girls and women as human beings. But I think I've come to realize that it's not one or the other. It is both the human rights and economic argument, because the audience will listen to you on something more, and you can use both of the arguments. But I think what we have also realized is that based on what you were saying about the increased awareness among boys and men, not only about the rights of others, but how all of the child marriage and the social norms and expectations also impacts their own lives, results into them making them much more committed and genuinely interested on advancing gender equality and addressing inequalities and dismantling stereotypical gender roles and norms at the family level. And also that resulted into parents becoming more attentive, and that resulted into fathers being more attentive as well. And then we started developing working programs on working with fathers. And that also resulted into a very interesting piece where, sometimes in these conversations of child marriage, we generally tend to blame women, and the mothers are the ones that do it, right? We have seen that argument, particularly in South Asian context or African context as well. By bringing father and alerting them about their responsibility and role also have resulted into de-escalating this patriarchal carrot or dividend that is there in the system that actually challenged and helped. So when then fathers started and boys started talking about it, another actor that got pulled over is the religious leaders, because the marriage traditionally is heterosexual, one. Second, and then the religion has a lot to do with all the arguments about, because we have laws that say, marrying anyone below the age of 18 is a crime, basically, right? But that is not still working. And my point also is that we need to then look at this holistic aspect of, if we really want to accelerate as well, to debunk that ending child marriage or women's rights issues are not only women's issues. Those are societal issues. And then there is a role for boys and men that we need to step in and play. And hence, we haven't seen that progression on the programmatic side yet. There's very less work happening. But at the same time, also the last point I would like to alert is that investing on or inclusion of the work with boys and men is not a separate solution or a separate process. It is one of the strategies of the overall program, right? And then engaging boys and men is not the end goal. Engaging boys and men should result into ending child marriage or advancing gender equality or advancing bodily autonomy and rights and so on. So that needs to be very, very clear from the beginning, and that it is not a competition between gender or sexes. It's about how do we find ways to work together. And those men who are involved in this work need to be really, really listening to women's experience and then associate with that and bring their own lived experience and engage in that very, as we call, very, sort of transformative manner.
So as we're thinking about programmatic investments and incentives, thinking not only about education and economic opportunity, but also programs to address the social norms that, as we heard earlier, are important drivers of this practice. I want to make sure we open the floor to questions from our participants for our panelists. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. We are taking them in the room and also online, and we will get to as many as we can. While folks are thinking in the room, I'm going to go to our online questions. The first question is, how can governments sustainably finance child marriage prevention efforts beyond donor funding? We heard earlier about the importance of investment, and we also know that we're in this moment of a sharp downturn when it comes to development assistance and also government funding. Given this constrained funding landscape, what are the challenges, and also what do you think the opportunities are when it comes to looking at innovative financial approaches beyond donor funding? Anyone want to take that on?
I can try.
Thank you.
Would you like to go first? You come from government, so.
Why don't we start with someone from the Ministry of Finance?
I will try. I think one of the things that we need to do in terms of the sustainability is to look inwards and see how we can crowd in more resources that will ensure that some of those gains are being consolidated. Like in our own case in Nigeria, the present administration is putting on a lot of efforts to see how they crowd in resources. And that's one of the reasons why the government took in some bold steps in removing the fuel subsidy and liberalizing the forex market, so that at least more resources will come in and to support the subnationals, where bulk of these issues or challenges are domiciled in. And with that, I can assure you they have more liquidity in the fiscal space where they can fund some of these laudable initiatives. And they are putting in a lot of efforts by making it inclusive in their annual budgets, and to the glory of what we have been doing all along is to tie in some of those investments to lure them to come forward by saying, for you to access this, these are the criteria, and you must put it as a line budget in some of your funding of activities. And I think if it is sustained, I can assure you with the so many interventions that we have along human capital development, it's just a matter of little time. Some of those results will begin to come to fore. Because as you know, human capital development is not something you harvest or feel just instant. It takes a little time before it begins to manifest. And I think that's some of the efforts we are putting in Nigeria.
That's a really helpful look at what's happening in Nigeria. Anju, I wonder, in light of your work at the Global Financing Facility, can you say more about how global institutions should be supporting country-led efforts to address this issue?
And they should be doing exactly what you described. And so just to tell you a little bit about the Global Financing Facility, it's a multi-donor trust fund housed at the World Bank, whose mandate is women, children, and adolescents' health. And the way the Global Financing Facility works is it piggybacks World Bank loans by adding a sweetener grant to usually a health sector loan, but it can be education, multi-sectoral, social protection sector as well, where there are additional incentives for the government to focus particularly on women, children, and adolescents' health. And clearly, it's one of the key issues with child marriages, and your costing study shows this, that a lot of the costs are incurred because married girls then have poor health, their children have poor health, they have poor nutrition. So their human capital is being depleted. They don't have the opportunity to go to school. They're not going to get jobs. So how do we stop that spiral? And one of the things that the GFF support, both technical support and financing support, can do is prioritize reproductive, maternal, and child health as part of government budgets and help to streamline that so that a big effort is ongoing right now to have primary health care systems be integrated and not having vertical programs for immunization, vertical programs for HIV, vertical programs that, by the way, donors have created in the last 20 to 30 years. And we need to be going away from that system. Why is it that a young, 17-year-old who's pregnant can't come and get an ANC checkup and also sign up and make sure her child will get the immunization when she comes back, and she'll get nutritional supplements, and her delivery is going to be channeled to a safe facility where she is not having to pay an outrageous amount of money to deliver a child. So one of the key areas in which we are supporting governments is how to not just have these separate adolescent health programs, which often provide only information but very little services. Some of them are school-based and linked, and they do good service in informing boys and girls about the facts of life and other things. But girls need real family planning. Girls need real maternal health. Girls need nutritional supplements. So they need real services, which currently are part of maternal and reproductive health ministry departments in the health ministry. And there isn't that component that says, okay, this 15-year-old, when she comes in, she needs to be told and provided family planning in perhaps a different way than the 25-year-old who comes in, and what are going to be her needs, or how is she going to have to deliver a baby. Or in schooling, for example, there are countries that actually forbid married girls from being in schools. So to the extent that we can support governments to change those laws and provide those support systems. So there is a lot that we can do to help governments both prioritize human capital as an investment for the country, not just for girls, but also to streamline some of the costs, so that, which we are all going to have to do given the world that we're living in.
I wanted to jump in because I'm a nonprofit organization, so I want to talk about the work that we do and why funders and what donors can do also is that I think investing, Rachel brought this up in terms of investing on local-led organizations that know the solutions. I think we know that the governments and local people, they actually know the solutions. They actually know what needs to work. I think what is missing is that the global movement, or those people who are donors and not donors, and what is missing is that they don't have the trust that actually we on the ground can actually do the work. That is a big thing that is like, I wish we can just stop that, and because we know what we're doing all that you're all describing here, I have seen it in my community. I work with boys and girls. I mean, I make sure that the whole community is embedded in actually race, and we're seeing the difference. We're seeing girls continuing with school, getting jobs, helping their mothers. I mean, the circle is just amazing. And I think we need to invest more on local and then let them figure it out. Like, let's find a trust and know that these things can be worked. So I just wanted to put that in there because I think if we don't push that, we'll go back to the same circle of like development that does not work. I mean, we are invited to give advice, we are invited to be part of a discussion, but we're never given the opportunity to lead. We are never given the opportunity to, to actually show that the things that we do actually works. So I just wanted to put that in there.
I am going to do a quick roundup of questions and give each of our panelists a final word so we can stay on time. So I saw a hand here and one over here. Why don't we start with you?
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think my question kind of looms around some of the answers maybe that had been given, but I am a teacher who have worked in the remote places in Africa, so I have seen some of this firsthand. And I just wanted to really know if the interventions that are designed are taken into consideration the family context of where some of these girls live. Because, for example, while I was teaching, we had a beautiful strategy to educate the girls, but when we went on holidays and we came back, we realized that about 20 to 30% of the girls that we educated had dropped out. And when we found out, we realized that their parents had different objectives for them. And that is because the parents were not taken into consideration while we were designing the aid to help those children. So I'm just wondering if in your intervention, do you take into consideration the local context in which these girls live in? Like, what are the ideologies that drive even the family scope of thinking? Because it starts from there. So that's just my question. Thank you.
Terrific. And why don't we, if it's okay, run the microphone over here, and then we'll take both of these questions and an opportunity to respond.
First, let me say, what a great panel. Thank you very much. I had a comment and a question. The question is about, would it make a difference in some countries if the leadership took a position on this? Where is Modi on this, for example, and pushed it down in whatever ways leaders can. My comment is about the DHS, the Demographic and Health Survey, which has a tremendous amount of good data on norms, how they're different across countries, within countries, a lot about how agency of girls and women. So I would hope that those of you who are concerned with child marriage lobby or do whatever you can to get other countries, since the US has pulled out, to sustain the DHS, because a lot of the relevance and use of it relies on the panel, for the fact that it comes year after year. So that's it.
Thank you for that. Laxman, I wonder if we could invite you at first to address the first question about taking into account local context. You've been focused through your work on social norm change, the norms that underlie the practice of child marriage. We know that changing social norms can take years, even decades. How do you take into account local context in the work that you do?
Absolutely. I think that's such an important question, right? So that's where I think the role of civil society comes in as well, and funding, the urgency to fund civil society comes from, is that the civil societies are the ones that are really located at the ground, who come from the same context where the programs are being implemented, right? So I think in most of the gender, as we call, on the spectrum of what we call the gender transformative programming, that is what it entails, is to understand the social norms and how power is sort of interplaying within different identities, different roles, different institutions in those setups, and then factor and develop programs building onto that. And that is why I think those innovative programs need more funding, is rather than this very international development. And I think the international development sector is also to blame, as Anju was saying, on looking at how the programming should look like, which actually should be more bottom-up rather than very top-down in an INGO model. And that's where I think what you are bringing up becomes so crucial. If you look at the evidence, the evidence coming from the local grassroots organizations are much more sustainable than those of the INGO's structure. And that's why increasingly there has been an interest on INGOs to channel money to the local organizations, because they are the experts of the local situation, right? And will be much more effective and be able to navigate through those dynamics much more effectively and make those interventions successfully as well. But also in the same vein, while we say family context or local context matter, or norms or culture, the idea is also to challenge this patriarchal and power over culture as well. So I think we also need to be careful about, this is the family context, this is culture. But again, that our intervention is to actually challenge those cultural practices from within those who are part of the culture. Because that's where the authenticity comes in. And that's where I think we need to work with everyone that uphold power or contribute in maintaining a certain level of power dynamics. And that's what all the social norms interventions is all about, right? And it takes time, as you said. But I think that's where if we can, connecting with the earlier question as well, I think if we can showcase that these social development or human rights-based framework or economic arguments can also convince the government that militarization is not the solution. It's the problem. And not divert money to military, but rather to invest in the societies. That will create much more societal, whatever the government is aiming at, that is much more effective way for the governments to think. Funding military is not leading us anywhere. We know conflict doesn't lead to peace at all. We need to have a very different idea to understand what this work is all about, and counter the way right now the US, we are here, we need to problematize where we are, right? The US is funding military and saying there's no funding money for childcare. That's not what government should do. The government should fund the war. That is where the problem lies, is that we need to challenge that, and that is not absolutely the way.
Thank you for that. I wonder, Mustafa, if I could ask you to address one of the questions raised by another participant about the importance of leadership. What difference would it make to have a leader at the top in a country really commit to making this a priority? Can you talk about that from your perspective?
Yes, thank you very much. I think from my own perspective, it's good to have a leader who makes it a priority. But in my own context, from where I come from, the subnationals are somehow autonomous. So if you just, it's not like a unitary system where the center is so powerful that once you dish out a directive or give out your policy statement, all others will key in. It takes a lot of efforts and a lot of advocacy, like I said, for the subnationals to understand the priority of the leader at the top. Like I mentioned earlier, at the risk of being repetitive, that the present administration under the leadership of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Nigeria is to ensure that you pool in all the resources in one basket, so that at least you prioritize some of these interventions, like he is making a lot of investments into human capital, like I said, and leaning on some of the development partners. And in the past, what we used to see in Nigeria is mostly like a supply-driven kind of loans. But over time, as we begin to engage and look at the successes or the failures of those interventions. And I think we must give it to World Bank. They are coming in with a new model of doing a program for result. You perform, you then get rewarded. And with that, a lot of subnationals are committing their own resources so that at least they can get rewards from those kind of investments they have committed. And again, for over a decade, I can say from my own side, the World Bank has not intervened in some of the analytics and feasibility studies in terms of grant. They always give some funds in terms of preparatory activities when almost the program is about to be effective. So before you understudy or take those analysis and make impactful strides, the program is already ending and with a lot of funds available for you to utilize. But because the programs are structured in 4 or 5 years, you are short-term interventions, you are not able to achieve a lot. But what they came in with for 2026 pipeline, we've seen them trying to support the analytical works, the feasibility studies, before you even go to negotiate for what you want. So what we are seeing these days now is you are going for demand-driven kind of interventions from the donor partners. And I think with that and the efforts the president is putting to retweak some of our policies and interventions, I think with this, just give us a few more years, the dividends will all be there. At the beginning, it might be very tough, but the end result is where we are looking at, and there will be light at the end of the tunnel at all times. Thank you very much.
Very clear demonstration of the importance of longer-term investment and of local leadership. Anju, one of our questioners mentioned the Demographic and Health Survey, which has been absolutely essential in so many areas, including in this one, in child marriage. What would you like to see global institutions do to help ensure that a critical resource like that is not subject to the political vagaries of any one country?
Yeah, I think we do, we do have to advocate for resources for data because it's so critical. That said, I think, sometimes necessity is the mother of invention, and we are looking at a lot of alternative ways to do surveys. We're finding phone surveys, we're validating them, we are using AI data, generated data to assess things, and we know that a lot of countries that used to have DHSs graduated out of the DHSs, Indonesia, a lot of Asian countries, and many countries were actually at the DHS model was largely countries financing the survey themselves. It was a technical assistance that was donor supported. So we can investigate what some of those alternatives would be. And I would just add one important point, building on what Lakshman and Kenya were saying. I think it's not an issue of government versus civil society. I think we need government and civil society, and we need the private sector to innovate and come together. If we're going to mobilize parents, fathers to send their girls to school, well, there has to be a school, which the government has to provide. There has to be a toilet there. There has to be water there. There have to be teachers who are paid who come to teach those girls. So it is the government's responsibility, and it should be the government's responsibility to provide those essential services that are part of human capital development. So I don't think it's an either or. But we should also keep in mind that, not every community has a Kenya. And some of, so we have to think about how many of our community-based interventions go to scale. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we have had. Some of our most creative initiatives when, the government can't possibly do it at the quality and devotion that CSOs do it. And so we need to find streamlined ways to make things go to scale, because otherwise, I worked in Nepal for 6 years. We had a fantastic adolescent empowerment program, but then after our funding was over, we left, and I didn't even have the heart to go back and see what happens to those girls and those boys and those communities, because once that funding ends, and it's 300 people, but Nepal's rate and population is so high, there's just no way we could be reaching, batches of 300 people all across. So I think everybody's contribution is important, and each brings its own strength.
Kenya, to that end, I wonder if we can turn to you for a final word as we close out. What would you like to leave this group with in terms of what to prioritize to accelerate progress?
I think one thing I wanted to add as I finish, is that what we normally see is that governments tend to forget the local partners. They just look to the multilateral. So we really need to shift that, because as we go forward, there's a lot that the community leaders and the people who are on the ground are really doing a lot. So I hope that governments can also move towards that. I think what I want to leave, not necessarily what we need to prioritize, I think what I want to leave with you all is that I want us to know that for every closed clinic, for every defunded scholarship, every safe space that has been closed represent the future of girls. It is a trade that we cannot afford to happen, but it is happening. And you know what? We are always told that it is the traditional communities that are forcing their girls to go get married. But in this time, it's actually governments and politicians that are really, really driving girls to go get married. So I really hope you can go home and think about that. It is no longer about the traditionals or socials, whatever in the communities. It is the political agenda, indifferences. They are bargaining the future of our girls, and we need to step up for them.
Well, it is clear that we have much work to do to prevent the incredible cost of child marriage, but there's no doubt that this panel helped illuminate the path forward. So please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.